If you've ever worked the night shift, you know how the world changes after dark. The building feels emptier, the shadows seem longer, and the people you work with can start to feel like strangers. I learned it the hard way during my first year out of college, when I took a job at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town. I thought the worst part would be the hours, but I was wrong. The worst part was my coworker, Mark. The warehouse was huge rows and rows of shelves stacked with boxes, forklifts humming up and down the aisles, and a break room that always smelled like burnt coffee. I worked the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, mostly unloading trucks and sorting packages. There were only a handful of us on nights, and for the most part, everyone kept to themselves. Mark was different. He was in his late 30s, tall and thin, with greasy hair and a nervous energy that made everyone uneasy. He'd been at the warehouse for years, but no one seemed to know much about him. He rarely spoke, except to mutter to himself or ask strange questions. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me from across the break room, his eyes wide and unblinking. At first, I tried to be friendly. I'd say hi when I passed him in the hall, or offer him a cup of coffee during breaks. He'd just nod, never smiling, and go back to whatever he was doing. The other guys warned me to keep my distance. "Mark's harmless," one of them said, "but he's off. Just don't get on his bad side." One night, about a month into the job, I was assigned to work with Mark in the back section of the warehouse. We were supposed to reorganize some old inventory, moving boxes from one shelf to another. The area was poorly lit, the overhead bulbs flickering, and the only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. We worked in silence for a while, stacking boxes and scanning barcodes. Then Mark started talking quiet at first, then louder, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you?" he asked, not looking at me. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "I guess it's a big building. Easy to get spooked." He nodded, his eyes darting around the shadows. "Sometimes I see things. People who aren't supposed to be here. They hide in the racks, watching." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. "Maybe you just need more sleep." He didn't smile. "They come out at night, when it's quiet. You'll see." The rest of the shift passed in uneasy silence. When I clocked out, I found a note tucked into my locker. It was written in shaky handwriting. "Be careful. They know you're here." I tried to brush it off, but over the next few weeks, things got weirder. I'd find my tools moved, my lunch missing, strange symbols drawn on the whiteboard in the break room. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps behind me in the aisles, but when I turned around, no one was there. One night, I stayed late to finish a project. The warehouse was empty except for me and Mark. I was in the back, stacking boxes, when I heard a crash. I ran to the source and found Mark standing over a broken pallet, breathing hard. "They're here," he whispered. "They're coming for us." I tried to calm him down, but he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You have to hide," he said. "If they find you, they'll never let you leave." I pulled away and ran to the office to call security, but the phones were dead. The lights flickered, and the building seemed to grow colder. I heard footsteps echoing in the aisles, voices whispering in the dark. I hid in the supply closet, heart pounding, listening as Mark's voice echoed through the warehouse. "You can't hide from them. They know you're here." After what felt like hours, the sun started to rise, and the building returned to normal. The phones worked, the lights were steady, and Mark was gone. He never came back to work, and no one knew where he went. For weeks after, I had nightmares about that night. The footsteps, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a dark building, I still hear Mark's voice, warning me to hide. Because sometimes, the scariest coworkers aren't the ones you know, they're the ones who disappear, leaving you to wonder what's really hiding in the shadows. If you've ever worked late in an office building, you know how the world changes after everyone else goes home. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the echo of your own footsteps, the way the cubicles turn into a maze of shadows. It's easy to start feeling like you we the only person left in the world. But sometimes, you're not as alone as you think. I was 26, working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Dallas. The job was boring, but it paid the bills, and I liked most of my coworkers. The only one who ever made me uneasy was a guy named Dennis. Dennis was in his 40s, with thinning hair and a habit of staring just a little too long. He'd been at the company forever, but no one seemed to know much about him. He rarely joined in on office banter, never came to happy hour, and always seemed to be working late. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me from across the break room, his eyes cold and unreadable. One week in December, we were slammed with year-end reports. I stayed late every night, sometimes until midnight, trying to get everything done. Most nights, Dennis was the only other person left in the building. He'd sit at his desk, typing away, barely acknowledging me when I left. One night, I was the last one in the office. I was finishing up a spreadsheet when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I looked up and saw Dennis standing by the door, watching me. "Burning the midnight oil?" he said, his voice flat. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Trying to get these reports done." He nodded, then turned and walked away. I went back to work, but a few minutes later, I heard the elevator ding. I assumed Dennis had left, but when I packed up to go, I saw his coat still hanging on his chair. I shrugged it off and headed for the elevator. As I waited, I heard a noise from the supply closet, a soft thump, like something falling. I walked over and opened the door, but the closet was empty. When I turned around, Dennis was standing at the end of the hallway, staring at me. He didn't say anything, just watched as I hurried to the elevator. The next night, I stayed late again. Around 11 p.m., I went to the break room for coffee and found Dennis sitting at the table, staring at a stack of papers. "Long night?" I asked. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "You should go home," he said. "It's not safe here after dark." I laughed nervously. "What do you mean?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "There are things in this building. Things that come out when everyone else is gone. I've seen them." I tried to brush it off as a joke, but Dennis didn't smile. "Just be careful," he said. "Don't stay too late." That night I left as soon as I could. But the next evening, I got caught up in work and lost track of time. By the time I realized how late it was, the office was empty. I packed up and headed for the elevator, but when the doors opened, the lights inside flickered and went out. I took the stairs instead, hurrying down the darkened stairwell. Halfway down, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, heavy, echoing off the concrete walls. I turned, but no one was there. I ran the rest of the way, heart pounding, and burst out into the lobby. The security guard was gone, the front doors locked. I pounded on the glass until someone finally let me out. The next day, I told my boss what had happened. He just shrugged. "This building is old. Lots of weird noises at night." But Dennis avoided me after that. He stopped staying late, stopped talking to me, stopped making eye contact. A few weeks later, he quit without warning. No one knew where he went. A month after Dennis left, I was working late again. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I looked up, expecting to see the cleaning crew, but the office was empty. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside my door. I sat there, frozen, as the doorknob rattled. Then, just as suddenly, the footsteps retreated, fading into the darkness. I never saw Dennis again. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the office after dark, I hear footsteps in the hallway or see a shadow move past the door. And I remember his warning, don't stay too late, because sometimes the scariest coworkers aren't the ones you know. They're the ones who leave something behind. If you've ever started a new job, you know how awkward it can be to fit in with a new team. But sometimes, it is not the new person you have to worry about. It's the one who has been there all along. I learned that lesson the hard way at my first real office job, working for a small insurance company in Ohio. I was 24, fresh out of college, and eager to prove myself. The office was small, just a dozen people in a cramped suite on the third floor of an old building downtown. My boss, Mr. Franklin, was friendly, and most of my co-workers were nice enough. But there was one guy who made everyone uncomfortable. Greg. Greg was in his late 40s, with thinning hair and a habit of wearing the same wrinkled dress shirt every day. He'd been at the company for years, but no one seemed to know much about him. He rarely joined in on conversations, never came to office parties, and always seemed to be watching from the corner of his eye. On my first day, Greg barely acknowledged me. He just grunted when introduced and went back to his computer. Over the next few weeks, I noticed he had a strange routine. He'd arrive early, leave late, and spend hours in the break room, staring at the wall or scribbling in a battered notebook. One afternoon, I was making copies when I heard Greg talking to himself in the supply closet. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but I could make out a few words. "They're watching. Can't trust them. Have to be careful." I backed away, not wanting him to know I'd heard. A few days later, I found a note on my desk. It was written in shaky handwriting. "Be careful who you trust." I looked around, but Greg was the only one in the office. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned away. Things got weirder after that. I'd find my chair moved, my computer logged out, files missing from my desk. Sometimes I'd catch Greg watching me from the hallway, his eyes cold and empty. One night, I stayed late to finish a project. The office was dark, the only light coming from my monitor. I heard footsteps in the hallway and looked up to see Greg standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't be here after dark," he said, his voice flat. I tried to laugh it off. "Just finishing up some work." He shook his head. "Bad things happen here at night. You should go home." I packed up and left, but the next morning, I found another note on my desk. "They know you stayed late." I started to feel paranoid. I changed my passwords, locked my drawers, and avoided Greg as much as possible. But the feeling of being watched never went away. One Friday, the office was empty except for me and Greg. I was in the break room when he came in, holding his notebook. "They're coming tonight," he whispered. "You need to leave." I tried to ignore him, but he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Promise me you'll go home." I nodded, and he let me go. I left early, heart pounding, and spent the weekend trying not to think about it. On Monday, Greg didn't show up for work. Mr. Franklin called his apartment, but there was no answer. The police went to check on him and found the place empty, no sign of Greg. Just stacks of notebooks filled with paranoid ramblings and lists of names, including mine. After that, strange things started happening in the office. Files went missing, computers crashed, and people started quitting. The company eventually went out of business, and the building was sold. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Greg. Did he know something the rest of us didn't? Or was he just a lonely, broken man, lost in his own fears? Now, whenever I start a new job, I pay attention to the quiet ones, the ones who watch from the shadows. Because sometimes, the scariest co-workers aren't the ones who make trouble. They read the ones who see things no one else can. And sometimes, the warnings you ignore are the ones you remember for the rest of your life.